In today's video, we're once again discussing the future of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver. Is there any issues with him giving a long-term commitment? Why is he not signed? It's stirring up a lot of topics amongst the national and Vancouver media. We'll discuss his future, whether or not it could lead to a trade or where things stand. We also have the latest talk around Jacob Markstrom. Another team in the Western Conference has emerged as a potential landing spot for his services, as well as Washington Capitals forward Anthony Mantha, who is, has been apparent for a long time that the Capitals and him were kind of heading towards a divorce, you could say, but he's played well enough to see, has he gotten the attention of some of the contending teams that he could be traded to ahead of the deadline. All that and more, including some roster updates and Joseph Woll returning to Toronto, which is great news for them, coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here today. Some pretty big trade rumors involving guys like Elias Pettersson, which we'll get into here in a little bit. First, we have lots of other updates around the NHL. We got word today that the Colorado Avalanche are getting back forward Valeri Nichushkin, who's been as part of the player assistance program. The NHLPA announced today that he has been cleared from the program and is able to return to the Avalanche and begin practicing. Obviously, he'll need some time to get back, probably, when it comes to conditioning and, getting reacclimatized, I guess, with his team. Probably be a little bit before he plays. I'd suspect, possibly another week. It's really difficult to say. But the good news is he's gone through the necessary program. He's gotten the necessary help and assistance that he was looking for, and they've cleared him to return. So obviously, to be cleared to return, they obviously have to feel like he's in a good place. So that's great to hear. From the Avalanche perspective, that's pretty much as good as you can get when it comes to getting like a trade deadline acquisition. To get Nichushkin back in the lineup and have him ready to go will be absolutely huge for the rest of the season. Hopefully he can stay healthy, and so whatever he was dealing with through that program is hopefully behind him now, and that'll be an absolute big addition between getting him back, and if they do make another move or two to solidify their depth down the middle, especially maybe add another backup goaltender, they certainly will be another contender once again for the Stanley Cup. But be curious to see what other moves we see the Avalanche do. But getting Nichushkin back is an absolutely huge help no matter what. Toronto Maple Leafs are getting back goaltender Joseph Woll. Has been out for an extended period of time as well after battling a long-term injury. He was sent down to the American Hockey League with the Marlies for a conditioning stint. That went well, and he's been recalled. So they will now have the three goalies in the NHL. The question is, for how long will they go the rest of the season like this? Will they consider making a move? You have to wonder. I mean, the thing with Joseph Woll, great goaltender, certainly the guy who I think they would like to see be the goalie of the future and kind of really take that spot and make it his, but he's had trouble staying healthy, and it's kind of the story of his career, so to speak, so far. Do they really want to take the chance and either trade Samsonov or Jones? I would think probably not, which is going to just complicate things. It eats up an extra roster spot and salary cap space, which, obviously prevents them from keeping, an extra forward or defenseman or what have you on the roster, right? So it certainly makes things more complicated from those perspectives. But, trading a goalie might not be the most optimal thing to do. Getting Martin Jones down to the American Hockey League via waivers that he would need, probably not optimal either, because it's been quite a while that he's been up with the NHL club. Lots of teams are out there looking for goaltender help ahead of the deadline and ahead of the playoffs. I am quite confident Jones would get snagged on waivers. So really, I don't know that the Leafs do anything except keep the three guys around and try to ride through the rest of the season with them on the roster at the NHL level. So we'll have to wait and see how things go. But getting Woll back is certainly encouraging, positive piece of news for the Leafs. It's just going to possibly cut down on playing time for the other two, and I'd be curious to see how they handle the three goalie situation. Of course, we saw the, I guess I'm not really sure what to call it, but the injury for TJ Oshie a few days ago. Obviously he went down in a heap of pain. There was no contact or nothing. He was completely on his own, but he is now officially on injured reserve. They took a few days to do that, and they have called up prospect youngster Ivan Mironishenko. So he'll get another crack at the NHL. He did get a few games earlier this season. The Caps are doing battle with the Ottawa Senators tonight, so it's the battle of the capital cities of Canada and the U.S. tonight in D.C. Artem Zub did not skate this morning and is expected to miss his second straight game. He had been dealing with a lower body injury since back in the Leaf game when really Greg took that slap shot and Raleigh gets suspended and that whole mayhem broke out a couple weeks ago now. And he did try to play through it for a few games, but just was having a tough time. So he looks to be sitting out for his second straight game. So we're expected to see Travis Hamonic once again in the lineup in his spot. Everything else for the Senators expected to remain the same for tonight. In Buffalo, they've recalled Tyson Jost. New Jersey, they had a roster move as well, sending forward Nolan Foote down to the American Hockey League on a conditioning stint after recovering from injury. So we'll see how that goes. And he could be recalled at a later date. The Predators also reassigned Igor Afanaseyev as well down to Milwaukee of the AHL. And in Boston, we have a update as well. The defenseman Derek Forbort is going to miss tonight's game as a healthy scratch, and that's because apparently he missed a team meeting. So of course the team will have to, lay down some sort of punishment for missing that meeting. So he's not going to play in tonight's contest. I know I've seen some other fans on social media suggesting between this and how he's played lately that they'd like to see an upgrade made in the blue line and Forbort be one of the players that be moved out. But we'll see long term where things go and how Don Sweeney and Cam Neely proceed here at the NHL trade deadline. I know they're going to be one of the teams to watch for sure. Speaking of trade rumors, though, let's get into the latest updates from around the NHL. We'll get into the Elias Pettersson talk here in just a moment. In Washington, since we're talking about a lot about the Washington Capitals and the Ottawa Senators tonight, one player to watch is Anthony Mantha. Mantha is a player who's been struggling, you could say, really like. The contract he has now is a longer-term deal, pretty lucrative deal. He signed to the Detroit Red Wings. At one point, Mantha was kind of looked upon as being somebody who should be able to be counted on for 25, 30 goals consistently. After a little bit of downtime in Detroit, he ended up getting traded to the Capitals. They swapped Mantha for Vrana. It was a deal that never really worked out well for either side. With Vrana not in Detroit any longer, it's already been moved on to St. Louis, and Mantha's probably would have been moved out of Washington by now as well, except the contract he has been too difficult to move, and it's prevented that from happening. But this year's kind of a bit of a bounce back for him. I mean, he's up to, I think it's 16 or 18 goals in the season now. He's certainly playing a little bit more physical. We saw him have a good fight the other night against Florida Panthers forward Nick Cousins. I know a lot of people around the league are kind of happy to see that because Cousins has been one of the biggest pests and biggest player, one of the, I guess, the biggest names out there, you could say, that kind of drives a lot of people crazy with some of his antics on the ice. So, he certainly had the backing of most of the players around the league for that one. But, Mantha is a guy who's got huge size. Like he's like about 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds, good skill, skates well for his size, good hands around the net. But he just struggled to be that consistent goal scorer, and he seems to kind of have a bit of that touch of that back this year to the point where he's kind of in that final year of his contract now that he could very well be a pretty good deadline acquisition. I know some of the names that are for teams out there that are kind of, expected to be considering him as an option, according to Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick on their most recent podcast, would be some teams like Edmonton, maybe even going back to Detroit. Yzerman and the Red Wings are right now in a wild card spot. They're trending towards being a playoff team. Of course, they're, far from a guarantee. Things can still happen. That it could go sideways, but right now things look good for Detroit. And so, they obviously would likely want to make some additions, but I don't see them being big buyers at the deadline. I don't think Yzerman's going to be the type to go in the first year of them getting in the playoffs after a long stretch of being out of it, that they're going to be able to go all in and spend a bunch of future assets like that. Could they make a pickup, though, of Mantha or somebody like that for some more depth on the wings and scoring? Somebody that they're familiar with? That's possible. I mean, he obviously still has a lot of friends on that team and a lot of guys he played with for a long time, so there could be some connections there. Another team mentioned as well could be the Edmonton Oilers. We know they like to add a forward or two, as well as probably a defenseman. And, of course, Ken Holland, the GM of the Oilers, drafted Mantha. It was obviously a long history with the Detroit Red Wings early from his career. So not to say that there couldn't be other interests, but a couple of notable teams there that certainly have a lot of history and knowledge of this player that could very well end up being a potential landing spot for him to be moved. The Capitals have been trying to trade Mantha for the better part of about 2 years, but the production and the contract just never lined up to really get enough interest to make it happen. But now could be that time, and we'll likely see him move on and maybe be a free agent this summer and sign somewhere new and get the next leg of his career on pace. But I suspect the next contract is definitely going to be a lot shorter term. Another thing to watch as well would be, of course, Jacob Markstrom. We know that the talks with the Devils were really close to finalizing a trade, but never came through. There's been belief that there's still some conversations ongoing between those two clubs, but a new team has emerged as well as being a potential fit as well, which is a division rival of the Flames, and that's the Los Angeles Kings. We know the Kings were had a real good start to the season. They had a big slump not too long ago. Things were trending downwards, but they've kind of since turned it around a bit, and it looked to be fairly secure to make the playoffs. So, of course, goaltending hasn't been the most consistent this year, and it is believed that they would like to make some upgrades to that, as well as other areas of the team before the deadline, if they're able to, depending on the price tags. And long term, their goaltending situation is the one area that I can see them really kind of focusing more on here. And if they can find a trade where they can not just get a rental, but somebody who they can re-sign and keep there, and obviously they'd have that interest in Markstrom, considering he's got some term. So either a rental they can re-sign or a player who's already signed for a few years, and Markstrom would be a terrific fit there. Talbot's only signed for the year. We know David Riddick is obviously doesn't have a great track record in the playoffs and is typically at best a number 3. I think the Kings, I've gotten some good games out of him lately, but it's risky going into the playoffs to rely on him more than they need to. They have tons of young prospects in draft capital. If they really want to make an upgrade, not only for this year's playoff run potential, but for the next few years of the future of their team, Markstrom might be an excellent target of theirs. And the Flames would certainly have some players on the Kings that they would likely be fond of. I mean, clearly there's lots there to like, whether it be Arthur Kaliev, Alex Turcotte. There's obviously some defensemen there that could be available too. There's lots of prospects there that are not going to be long-term LA Kings because there's just no room on the roster. The Flames could get themselves a pretty good-looking package, so they might make good trade partners for them. So we'll see if LA emerges to be a serious contender for Markstrom. At this point, it's only been mentioned as a potential landing spot. As well, Patrick Kane. What does the future of Kane hold after last night's return to Chicago and almost like the scripted storybook writing end where DeBrincat and Kane come back with Detroit to Chicago last night? DeBrincat gets the tying goal. Kane wins it in overtime on a breakaway. The fans were going nuts for him, even though their team, the Blackhawks, technically lost in overtime. The fans loved Kane so much that they were going crazy for him. And even during the welcome back and tribute they gave to him at the beginning of the game, the fans were going nuts for him. He ended up, I think, doing like 3 laps around the ice or something crazy. Like, they absolutely missed Kane, and they really, like, the way Kane kind of finished out his time in Chicago, you could tell he didn't look the same anymore, and he was having a lot of issues with that hip, but that hip looks mighty fine now that he's had the proper surgery to correct it. And some media members, I know Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman talked about it, wondering if the Blackhawks might have some regrets there, and is there a possibility after this season when Kane's contract's up with Detroit, could he head back to Chicago? Where does his future hold? Where does the things lie with him? Is there a return to Chicago in order? Is he going to sign in Detroit for a few more years? What's it likely going to be? I know Jeff Merrick talked to Mark Lazarus on this radio show today, and of course Lazarus would obviously probably have a little bit more of a better pulse on the Blackhawk situation. He didn't think Kane would be returning to Chicago. Not convinced that the Blackhawks would want to do that at this point, that they really don't want to really spend much in free agency, and they just intend to be bad probably for another 2 years, building up high draft picks and draft capital to really build this thing from the ground up. So at the end of the day, he said maybe does Kane return for one last season, maybe in 3 or 4 years when the rebuild's further along and Kane's near the end of his career. That might be a possibility, but for the time being, he doesn't see it being really something to expect. Odds are, there have been speculation the Red Wings may be offering contract extensions very soon, if not before the deadline, to Patrick Kane and David Perron both. So we'll see if they lock up their couple of veterans there who've had a pretty good impact on that team as of late. And in the case of Elias Pettersson in Vancouver, is there a long-term future there, or what exactly is going on? It's obviously popping up in the news cycle here yet again today. A lot more talk after reports from Friedman and Muriel talking about it on the 32 Thoughts podcast, and then from there, Vancouver media kind of reacted to that. I know Rick Dollywall and Donnie Taylor on the Dally and Donnie show was talking about it earlier. And, there's a lot of uncertainty around the future of Pettersson right now. Essentially, what Friedman said was that at this point, the Canucks seem a little bit frustrated that they don't have a long-term indication of what Pettersson wants to do, that he's, at this point, still not willing to talk contract. And at this point, they can't say that he wants out either, just that he's not ready to talk about the contract. Obviously, they'd like to get it done, secure his future. And the fact that it's not done is obviously frustrating to the fan base and to some degree frustrating to the team as well. Obviously, Rick Dollywall chimed in on this conversation as well, saying essentially that at this point, Pettersson has not given the Canucks really any kind of confirmation that he wants to be there long term. And until he wants to talk contract and get a deal done, it's hard to say that he wants to be there. He even said at one point he was not worried about it, and he said he was convinced that Pettersson would definitely sign. Now he's starting to finally lose that confidence a bit, and he's not so sure. Doesn't mean that Pettersson's a goner by any means. All we know is that the Canucks at this point were reportedly offering him a ton of cash on a long-term deal, and he hasn't really even shown any interest in it. Said he hasn't necessarily rejected it, sure as heck hasn't accepted it either, and it just kind of seems to be out there in limbo. A lot of teams are, and fans are watching and seeing what happened with Matthew Tkachuk last year, starting to get nervous, and I understand that's rightfully so. The Canucks, are they shopping Pettersson? No, absolutely they're not. Do they want to trade him? No, they absolutely do not. But the fact that, like Friedman said, if teams don't call and check in on this, they're not doing their job properly, because when a player is in the final year of his contract, he's a top player in the league, and it's unclear what the future holds, you have to check on that, because you don't know when you're going to have an opportunity to acquire a player like that again, to get a top 10, top 15 player, whatever he would be in the NHL, a top line centerman, 100-point player. Like, they don't grow on trees. And if you can figure out a way to get one, you should be doing that. At the end of the day, if the Canucks do end up having to move them, they're not really going to be thrilled with it, and they're not going to be in a position where it's going to be easy to win the trade. Trading a player like that is very, very difficult to get good assets on a short-term basis that you're going to be able to definitively say that you came out and get a really good deal and won the trade. I know some suggested that, because there was rumors back a couple months ago, which didn't seem to be from a great source, but there was interest from him, because it involved William Nylander too, who is now signed with the Leafs, that he wanted to go to Chicago. Well, if that's the case, let's say Chicago wins the draft lottery again, and they're going to pick first overall. Would you trade Pettersson for that first overall pick to get Celebrini? That would be a good haul in return, but short of that, it's going to be really, really tough to come anywhere close to winning that deal. So difficult to say exactly how this goes. All we know at this point is that he's not ready to talk contract. It's generating a ton of buzz. It's got to be a distraction to really everybody in Vancouver and the team. Hopefully it doesn't impact them too much, but at this point, he's showing no signs of giving them a commitment and really wanting to get this contract looked after. So until that happens, there's going to be rumors regarding him, and it's just the way it is. We'll see. At this point, we can't say that there's interest for him to definitely to leave, or that other teams are definitely pushing for a trade. But conversations are ongoing. Teams are inquiring. We'll have to see where it goes. Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.